BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On this episode of Cooper Friday, we're going to do something completely different for the channel. This is the first episode of the DB Cooper Hot Seat, and I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOR follower Chad Burke, who coined the term. And the Hot Seat is going to be a new set of debates that are going to happen on Black Box Online Radio, true crime debates where we discuss the cases that I feature and unsolved mysteries. My guest on the program today will be Pat Boland, and it's really a great honor to have Pat back on the show. Pat Boland was the first ever guest on Cooper Friday last year, and it's really great that she's making her return. Pat, are you with me?
I am. Nice to speak with you again, Ned.
Yes, and it's really good to have a repeat guest for Cooper Friday, especially in this new format, the DB Cooper Hot Seat. So the way that this one is going to work is we're both going to talk about what we genuinely think about the DB Cooper case. We're going to make some types of introductory remarks. Then we're going to look at some specific points. Now, neither Pat nor I are super strong on the suspects, but we will talk about suspects. But if anybody comes on the Cooper Hot Seat, we have a condition. If you do not have a DB Cooper suspect, you should provide 3 strong claims that you are going to be debating and defending. And I'm going to work mine into my little introductory statement, which is just going to be very brief, actually. And now, Pat, though, you're the guest, so would you like to go first or second with your introductory statement?
Why don't I go second? Because I didn't know I needed an introductory statement, so you go first.
Well, all you really have to do is just say what you genuinely think about DB Cooper. And you did tell me, though, 3 points, though, in our messages, so I know that you have those, right?
I do.
All right, so in case anybody is absolutely brand new to my channel and brand new to the Cooper Hot Seat, my name is Ned DeHaan, also known as Black Box Ned. Every Friday I talk about DB Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio, and of course you're welcome to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. My introduction to DB Cooper is actually very basic. I'm not completely sold on any of the suspects. If I have one point that I'm going to be arguing in this debate, the suspects that I am most curious about, and I do want to think very strongly of, will be Ted Braden and Skip Hall. The suspect that I'm absolutely the most curious about is Milton Voral, and Pat and I are going to get into this. The suspect that I think is the absolute, most interesting, but in a bad way, would be Walter Recca. I was about to say that Walter Recca was the worst suspect. No, Walter Recca will not be the worst suspect. I'm sure there are a lot more far-out people. Maybe Frank Morris would be the worst DB Cooper suspect. And ultimately, I think that DB Cooper was a Caucasian male, perhaps with some type of different ethnic background. I think Cooper had a multi-ethnic background. I can't confirm whether he was Latino or Native American, or maybe just of a different type of European heritage. I'm not completely sold that Cooper was Canadian, but I think more strongly of it every single day, as well as his French language abilities, because the name Dan Cooper that he used on the plane also came from the Dan Cooper comic books, which were published in French. Possibly, maybe he just made up the name Dan Cooper for another reason. I think that DB Cooper boarded the plane with the intention of getting the money. I think that there's a very high chance that he was trying to copycat Paul Cini, another Skyjacker who committed the crime in Canada, so that would be another example of somebody with a Canadian connection. And I think that he put in this plan in a relatively calculated way. I think Cooper was calculating. There's a documentary out there from Let Me Know that says that Cooper was most likely just kind of improvising it, and he really didn't have much of a plan. And I don't really think that's true at all. I think Cooper was very smart. I think that he was very sharp. I think that he had a lot of good instincts. And I also think that he really made very specific points. And I guess my final thing would be, I think Cooper jumped exactly when he wanted to. I don't think he was just guessing, or that he was like, well, am I close to Reno? Am I close to Mexico? No. Cooper chose that flight path because he knew where he wanted to jump and he knew exactly where he was going to go. So really, that's my very short introduction to all the things that I think about D.B. Cooper. I tried to blend in some things that were like strong points as well as weaker points, talking about some suspects, and there are things I will take to the bank about the drop zone, which I just shared. And without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Pat Boland. And really, Pat, because this is the first Cooper hot seat, just what do you honestly think about D.B. Cooper?
Well, I have to say, Ned, that on mostly everything you said, I agree with. As far as, multiracial or, that I don't know. I had a Sicilian grandfather, and I have to say he was pretty dark skinned. So I could see someone possibly taking him as, maybe being Mexican or Native American. So I'm not really sure on that. As far as the Canadian, I'm leaning towards that as well. I think there's a lot to that for several reasons. Like, it's easy to disappear up there. Your fingerprints wouldn't be on file, all that kind of stuff. As far as the name Dan Cooper, I don't know. I kind of think that's a non-starter. That's just me personally. I agree. I think he did this for the money. There was no grudge. There was no, political motive. There was nothing. I mean, he wanted the money. I mean, I think that's a non-starter for me also. As far as Cooper being, I don't think he was a Cini copycat in the sense, I don't think that he, picked up the newspaper and thought, oh, I'm going to do that next week. I mean, that doesn't ring true to me. Now, we do know that there were several guys that were kind of contemplating doing something like this just based on some of the witness reports. I think, this, after all, there were so many planes being hijacked in that period. People need to remember that. I think it was a very small step for someone to think, well, gee, if I'm not on the plane when it lands, they can't arrest me. So I don't buy that. Now, he may have heard about Cini and decided, I better speed up my timeline because, they're going to maybe install some new security measures or whatever. So that I believe. I think Cooper was a smart guy. I think he was very calculating. And I agree with you. I think the fact that he sent Tina up into the cockpit and then there was this time gap there, I think he was waiting for something, that he knew sort of the lay of the land, the terrain, what to look for, the lights of Vancouver or whatever it was he was looking for. Did he have an exact spot? Obviously, that would be impossible. But I don't think there's no way that you're planning this whole crime without thinking about what am I going to do once I jump out of the plane. That makes absolutely no sense. And to me, that defies any sort of logic. So Cooper had a plan for once he landed on the ground. And I think that makes sense that it had to include something where he was going to be, because that would explain how he got back to wherever he needed to be. So I have to say on most points, I agree with you on that.
Now, it seems like our biggest point of contention is the Paul Cini Skyjacking. And Pat, I always mess up this date. Is it November 13th of 1971, the Cini Skyjacking? Because in my mind, I have it as 9 days before, but when I always look at the calendar, it turns out it's not 9 days before. I think it's November 13th. Did I get that right?
I think you're right. It was, as I recall, a little bit over a week. I don't remember the exact date either, but, again, 1971. We didn't have a 24-hour news cycle. By the time you heard about this, now, if he lived in Canada, I think you'd hear about it sooner, but, by the time you saw it on the nightly news or read it in the morning newspaper the next day, and then, you had to immediately, bingo, I'm going to do this. I just think there's really not that much time to really plan it out unless you already in your mind were thinking of doing something like that. That's just my opinion on Cini. And the fact that Cini was a complete and total failure. I mean, like, you don't go follow someone who just got hit over the head, so it wasn't like, it wasn't like the copycats who saw, Cooper got away with this, I think I'll try it. And this was the polar opposite of that. Cini got, they literally did hit him over the head. So
yes, I know. I was just about to say that, like that's literally and metaphorically true. But okay, so this is what we're really going to be debating, because I've had Nicole Legg as a guest on the program, the co-host of the D.B. Cooper book review, and she asked me, did I think that Paul Cini inspired D.B. Cooper? And what I said was, after I made my Paul Cini episode, I thought 110% yes. Then, several months went by, and I, of course, had to take a step down and be like, well, I don't really know that that's true. I mean, we're not psychics, right? We're not mind readers or mediums. We can't really do that stuff to like 110% levels. But the reasons why that I thought that D.B. Cooper learned about the Cini skyjacking and he wanted to recreate it is because of everything that you just said. It's not what Paul Cini did. It's what he didn't do. Imagine somebody, reading about this just thinking, psh, I could do better than this guy. Look at how sloppy he was. Paul Cini tried to skyjack a plane with a black mask, and he was brandishing a shotgun, which he accidentally fired on the plane, and he also brought a bomb with 60 sticks of dynamite, and those are the things that Cooper did not do. Firstly, he did not wear a mask. He had his wraparound sunglasses. He's like, that's sufficient. He didn't carry a bomb with 60 sticks of dynamite. He only used what, possibly 8. We don't have any photographs, so I mean 4, 6, 8, something like that. A much smaller amount of dynamite that would have been contained in Cooper's briefcase if he did indeed have a real bomb. And thirdly, we don't even know if D.B. Cooper had a firearm. A lot of people think that he did, maybe in his coat pocket or in the mystery bag. And I think the final one, though, is the absolute biggest and most important reason why I thought that Paul Cini was an inspiration for D.B. Cooper is what you said, and what we were joking about how he got hit over the head literally and metaphorically. Paul Cini tried to cut open the twine to his own parachute using a fire axe from the plane's emergency kit. And when he did that, he put the shotgun down, and they seized that as an opportunity to accost him, and they started hitting him, and they hit him with the axe multiple times, right? And then D.B. Cooper's like, whoa, I can't let that happen. I've got to send, everyone to be in the cockpit, stay in the cockpit. Even Tina Mucklow has to be in the cockpit, because he corrected all of these sloppy mistakes from Paul Cini. And what do you think about that?
I think they're really valid points. My problem with this is this assumes that there's a guy sitting around who has such a pressing motive to commit a federal death penalty offense that he reads about somebody in the newspaper or sees it on Walter Cronkite and decides, I'm going to improve on this and do it myself. I mean, so I think that's kind of a leap right there. I'm not saying that there wasn't someone sitting around who thought, gee, I need $200,000. But to me, this is the kind of thing that you really think about. There was nothing about Cooper that seemed impulsive. And so to me, to give yourself even 7 or 8 days, basically, by the time you heard about it and put this into action, that's not very much time. This just doesn't seem like an impulsive act. And to me, to hear about something that never occurred to you before and then impulsively decide to do this within a week, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. That does not seem to make sense to me. But again, we don't know. When we find out who Cooper is, we can ask him, right? But I don't know. That's fine. There was also an interesting movie that came out a few years before called Doomsday Flight, the worst movie you've ever seen in your life. But there was a bomb that was going to go. It was this complicated story, but there's one part where one of the crew members says, I wish I had a parachute right now so I could jump out of the plane. And actually, this movie inspired a lot of bomb hoaxes that they ended up where the FAA, I guess, or whoever governs the airwaves, told local stations not even to want to play the movie anymore because they were having so many issues with these bomb hoaxes. So, I mean, I don't know. You know, there's that Ripcord show back in the early 60s where guys are jumping out of planes. And, you know, there were just a lot of things that I think this had to be brewing in someone's head for a while. And maybe this was the impetus to, or it could have been just huge coincidence, or it could have been some crazy guy who thought, I'll improve on what he did. So I don't know. I think it could be any of the above.
All right, so I have several different responses. And the first is, I actually really like what you said about how this could be just somebody who thought, oh, I need to speed up my game because, hey, look at this guy Paul Cini, someone who was already thinking about skyjacking. But in 1971, to be clear, skyjacking was a relatively new crime, comparatively speaking, compared to the 21st century. So these stories were getting out and going around, and more people were contemplating them. But in terms of D.B. Cooper's behavior, I think, as you said, we truly need to know who Cooper was. If this were a Canadian Cooper, absolutely there would be more exposure to the news, and somebody would just be thinking maybe about crossing the border, and that this is a bigger chance to get away. But I also have to bring up a point from Eric Eulis that he shared in one of the groups when he was talking about how when somebody commits a one-off crime, when a generally law-abiding citizen commits a one-off crime, normally it's something related to a heist. So even if Cooper is not completely crazy, somebody might have been tempted to do what Cini did, except do it in a better way. And I'll totally give you the points about other inspirations, other movies, and I think one of the most frustrating parts in the case is the Dan Cooper comic, and that's not necessarily, thing I would debate with you. That's just kind of my feeling about it. I think it's so frustrating because it makes so much sense, right? Oh, well, there was a Canadian character called Dan Cooper, the French language character, but at the same time, even though Dan Cooper was a skydiver and parachutist, we have no idea if that's why Cooper chose the name or not, right? I mean, that's kind of just like people investigating, and I find that so frustrating because I want to say just 100% that's why he chose the name. I don't know that. I mean, could be something much simpler than that.
You know, that to me, well, first of all, to go back what you said, oh no, the Skyjackings went back to like the 50s. So this, between 68 and 72, there were like 140 Skyjackings just in the U.S. So this, trust me, Ned, I was a kid back then. I mean, every week somebody was hijacking a plane, typically to Cuba. So this was not like, ooh, some weird new cyber crime that we've never heard of. No, everybody knew. Remember, the FBI they were talking about building a fake Havana airport in Florida.
Yes, I do. I heard that, yes.
So that they could, fool the hijackers and land. And when they thought they were in Cuba, the FBI is waiting for you. So no, skyjacking was extremely common back then. Sadly, very common, which is one of the reasons why we have all these, metal detectors and all this other stuff. Because finally those guys were threatening to fly a plane into a nuclear power plant, and that was kind of the tipping point that the federal government finally said, all right, enough is enough. So, no, I mean, this would be something that people knew about for a long time. So I have to disagree with that. As far as the name, I mean, picking the name of a comic book, that's a certain kind of person that does that, right? I think I'm going to hijack a plane, but I'm going to really, really be so cutesy that I'm going to, pick up a pun or I've seen people in the D.B. Cooper mystery group that are using names, fake profiles with, one of them was Cary Grant, that kind of stuff. I mean, to me, that's a little too cutesy for the type of person that I think Cooper was, who I think was a con man and a criminal. So I don't know. There's a lot of Dan Coopers floating around. Everybody seems to be able to connect their suspect to somebody named Dan. I mean, it's just such a common name. So yeah, maybe he saw a comic book at one point and it stuck in his head. But I don't know. I don't really know what that tells us, other than obviously if he did pick that name, well then that puts him in somewhere where they're speaking French, which is not the United States. So, but we don't know. So that's where we are on that.
Okay, so my immediate response is that skyjacking definitely happened well before the 70s. I totally will give you that one. And I find newer and newer stories about older skyjacking cases all the time from the 50s and the early 60s. Oh, wow, I had never heard of this one. But in terms of countermeasures that existed to stop skyjackings, they were very minimal at the time. You brought up the lack of metal detectors, but we even have Richard McCoy writing a paper in 1972 for his criminology education about countermeasures to stop skyjackings, and he ultimately decided that there was no effective way to stop a skyjacking in the way that Cooper did and that McCoy did and the way that Paul Cini attempted. So there really was this giant gaping hole of somebody's thinking, you know what, if I know how to use a parachute, maybe I'm not going to get caught and I'm going to get the $200,000. Now, to move on to something about how it's too cutesy to use a comic book name in your skyjacking. I would just cite one thing from Dr. Todd Grande, who it maybe isn't, the perfect YouTube psychologist or counseling educator, but he did say that if somebody were committing a crime and they wrote out something, they might just be using all types of things from their past, from their personality, from their experiences, because it's an opportunity to do so. Something that is in the back of their mind that they never talk to anyone about. All right, well, now's the time to talk about it. So that can be something that would be found in letters from serial killers and kidnapping and ransom notes, and maybe using the name Dan Cooper. So I will let you respond in any way you want, and then I do have a new topic for you, though, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I mean, you know what? I can see that, but the Dan Cooper comics, that's a clue. I mean, think about it. If the FBI put that together, wait a minute, Dan Cooper was this, skydiving superhero, but he was only in French language. Well, that really narrows the pool. I mean, how many people were exposed? I've never was, well, all right, we weren't around in that era, but, I've never served in the military in Belgium or France, so I mean, that would really narrow. I just think that's like a giveaway. And I don't know why Cooper would do that. That doesn't seem to go, the same guy who takes back notes and matchbooks is not leaving like a really big clue. I just, not when you could pick any name on earth. It just seems like that's just a very bland, sort of all-American, John Smith kind of name to me. So I don't know. But anyway, we'll never figure that one out.
No, we won't, and that's what's so frustrating, and I'll completely give you that. Pat, when I appeared on the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer, I said a very similar thing. He asked me, what do you think the origin of Dan Cooper was? And I said almost exactly what you just said. I was like, that's just a generic English name. Dan Cooper, Daniel Cooper. It almost is like a John Smith, and I've considered that so much, so I totally understand where you're coming from. But, we also said, though, that we were going to talk about some suspects in this recording. And the suspects that I really wanted to talk about were ones that I do think highly of, and they are Ted Braden and Skip Hall. I'm very curious about Milton Voral, absolutely not curious all about Rekha being D.B. Cooper, and we also said that we might say a few things about Wolfgang Gossett. Now, is there one of these suspects that you would like to talk about first?
Well, I guess we could start with Ted. I find Ted and Skip, I'm kind of putting them in almost like the same category there.
Yeah.
They have a lot of things that are similar,
Absolutely.
obviously some that are different, but I would put those if you want to have a race to the top, I sort of put them neck and neck in terms of checking a lot of boxes. Ted has obviously been around for a while, but, we all know about Ted's, in fact, I look in his Rampart thing that he did. I mean, if this is true, he said he had 695 free fall jumps. So, I mean, we know the guy had the skill set. He had very much of a criminal mindset. He had the skills. He was, kind of smoker, drinker, that kind of guy. He was fearless. To me, he was a rigger, which I think is really important, because I've spoken with a master parachute rigger, and, the way that Cooper cut up that reserve chute was really methodical and seemed like someone who had it was counterintuitive the way I would have cut it up, but then I'm not a rigger. So the way that he cut through all the knots was really strange and curious. And I remember even Tom Kay saying that the way that was done seemed like someone who had some knowledge that we did not have. Of course, to me, the number one thing that Ted has going for him, aside from all these boxes that he's clearly checking, is that his buddies that he was in the elite unit with, they all thought he was Cooper. Okay. Now, these are the kind of guys that it's life or death situations that they have to evaluate, people that they have to evaluate to make not only save their own lives, but the lives of a lot of other people. So I feel like they are extremely intuitive. There's a really great book. It's not a Cooper book, but it's called Surprise, Kill, Vanish by Annie Jacobson, that talks about a lot of the CIA, covert activities. Super interesting, talks a lot about that world. And these guys, I mean, they could find a traitor in their midst just by the way something the person said, something that they did, that most people would never detect in a million years. So to me, the fact that they, on November 24th, the minute that they heard the news, they all said, oh, that's Ted. I think that's very telling, because I don't think these guys throw around that kind of stuff just, out of the blue. So now, of course, the one main thing that Ted has going against him, which we all know about, is he was not a tall man. And that seems to be the description of Cooper, was that he was, maybe around 5'11"-ish, possibly taller. And Ted was 5'8" from everything I've seen, in bare feet, of course. So that's not a positive for him. In fact, for some people, that's a deal breaker. I still think that there are ways to make yourself look taller. I'm not saying to make yourself look 6'2", but that is a problem with him, clearly. But I don't think it knocks him out of contention. I still think he's in the top couple of people tier of who we know right now.
Now, do you think that there are any problems with Ted Braden's eye color, with his facial features? Some people think that his nose was too big in comparison to all of the Cooper sketches. Of course, he heavily resembles Composite C. Do you think that those are factors that would lower his suspect rating?
No, because I can't get past the fact that the sketches, as we've talked about, all look so different.
Yes.
I was thinking about this today. I mean, believe it or not, I personally have foiled a few crimes. I know you don't find this hard to believe, but I've been involved in a situation where a crime is being committed, but I didn't know it at the time. But I figured out what was going on later. And I no more would have been able to describe these people to a sketch artist. I mean, that's a really tricky thing. Now, identifying someone from a photograph, that's a whole other thing. thing. But actually saying, well, no, the nose is a little bit wider. To me, the fact that the sketches vary so much to me tells me that I don't think Cooper really, really looks so much like any of those sketches. Now, if the person is wildly different, if the person is 22 years old, if the person, is completely bald or whatever it is, okay. But I'm willing to give a lot of wiggle room. Now if you have an extremely odd nose, I guess, but, wearing sunglasses, everybody's face looks different. It's really interesting that Flo's sketch looks so wildly different from the other two. And she is the only one who saw him without his glasses, except for the one passenger who claimed he briefly saw him. But I don't know about that.
And you mean a composite C that was done in 1988?
Yes, that looks sort of like Dracula, sort of like Grandpa Munster. I mean, Flo was terrified, clearly. I mean, I think that's her memory of him was, that he was a very bad man, but she saw his eyes. And we all know that, your eyes are the window to your soul. Eyes are a big giveaway. And the fact that they didn't see his eyes, and I think Flo really sensed what a bad guy he was by looking into his eyes. So that was her memory of him. So, to me, any of these guys do look like the sketch or they don't look like the sketch. I think it's whatever you want it to be. So as far as Ted, he could be the sketch or he could not be it. But I do think, he does check a lot of boxes. I just think the height, we know that Ted liked to wear cowboy boots, which is interesting. I'm in Texas, so I know a lot about cowboy boots. I was even measuring my husband's cowboy boots. You can make yourself a couple of inches taller. I don't think that's not a problem.
If somebody were 5'8",
if he was,
I don't really think that would be like anything crazy to think that you're 5'10" or 5'11". As you just said, with boots as well as perhaps counting for things like hair. And Cooper was sitting down almost the entire time, not completely,
exactly.
But almost, right?
Exactly, which is almost impossible unless someone is, a basketball player. People, some people are short-waisted, long-waisted. You can get into all that kind of stuff. But yes, when you're sitting down, I also have to keep going back to the fact that the main witnesses, who are the three stewardesses, were very young. And I think a young woman trying to, and Bill, who was also very young, trying to evaluate the age of someone, I think Bill said it best. He was a 40-year-old white guy, because when you're 20 years old, anybody who's older, anybody who looks like your dad, they're all 40. 40 is old, right, when you're 20. So again, I think all these witnesses, I think they were all heroes. I love them, but I just think their descriptions, I just don't think they were the best witnesses, especially the ladies, because they were scared. I certainly would be.
Now, if we're going to move on, though, there is a suspect named Skip Hall, and he is the suspect of John Limbach, whom I hope to have on the program very shortly. And Skip Hall is somebody whom I actually think resembles certain aspects of all the sketches. Like, I can see certain parts of his features in all of them, even Composite C. And what really do you think about Skip Hall?
Well, I agree with you. Skip is a great suspect, and I think you pinned it. Skip is like a chameleon type to me. Here's a guy who passed as Cuban using a fake name, and people believed him. He was working both sides of the, pro-Castro, anti-Castro. So I like that about a Cooper-esque person, is that they could make themselves, even with subtle changes, looking completely different and fool people, which is what I think Cooper did. So I really like that about Skip. Obviously, he was a criminal. He had height going for him. He also had pilot I guess he had a pilot's license. He also apparently was involved with rigging chutes, which again, I think is a big plus. He didn't have a lot of jumps under his belt, but he did have some. So that's important to me, because there is no way to me that Cooper had never had any experience with parachutes or jumping out of a plane. I refuse to believe that.
Oh,
Somebody prove me wrong, please, but I just don't think that makes any sense to me whatsoever. So, I'm going down, he needed money. He had, supposedly experience with explosives. So, he was in what I would call that world, the same as Ted, these kind of covert, ops, maybe doing things off the books a little. Now, granted, Ted was doing it, with the U.S. military, but, Skip was involved in Bay of Pigs. He just had a lot of, he checks a lot of boxes. Now, he did have some health issues that seem like they might have been limiting, but then he seemed to be operating out there, so maybe not as limiting, like he had epilepsy, but I guess he was still able to jump. Apparently right before 71 he had hepatitis, but people do recover from hepatitis, so I don't know that is so limiting. He did go on to live, a number of years after that. So to me, the thing that really, because we have to look, to be fair, you always have to say both sides. None of these guys are perfect, right? So to me, the limiting thing about Skip is that he was really well known. If you Google Lauren Hall, you're going to come up with a whole lot of stuff. Now, granted, a lot of it was more recently declassified information, but he was being heavily investigated as part of the JFK assassination. And, Jim Garrison in New Orleans, he was after Skip and a lot of these other guys. So, when you start putting D.B. Cooper on the grassy knoll, that's when I kind of get lost a little bit. I know you did an episode on the Black Dahlia, which I've always been fascinated by that case. But, when George Hodell's son wrote that book, which was fascinating. I think he's written a few books, but I read at least one. And you're like, yeah, his dad was the killer. But then when he starts connecting his dad to but I forgot to tell you, my dad is also the Zodiac. And then it's like, okay, wait a minute. then you've lost me. So I don't know. I think since Skip was so heavily investigated in the JFK assassination, would he really pull off? Only a couple of years after, there was the trial with that Clay Shaw, who was, Jim Garrison brought on trial as being, one of the, architects of the assassination, etc. Would he have pulled off such a high-profile crime? That seems, to me, counterintuitive with Skip being Cooper. It's also odd to me that it doesn't seem like anybody has ever figured this out, considering he is a well-known person. Now, I recently have read a couple of JFK conspiracy books, but these were, very well written, and by people who've written multiple books. They were very well researched. I'm not saying I believe all that stuff, but I've actually spoken to two of the authors, and I didn't mention Skip as being Cooper. I just mentioned that, did they think one of the people involved with this, and they were shocked. What? We've never heard that, thought that. So I don't know. How come nobody ever put this together before? That's, now, not to take away from John, because maybe John is the genius and he's the one who figured it out, and I hope he did. But that's a little strange to me, whereas somebody like Braden, people were all over him, immediately. At least his buddies. That doesn't mean they turned him into the FBI, but apparently the FBI did look into him, from what I understand. It's not in the 302s that we know of, but apparently, he had to be. I mean, this guy was like, again, someone who was really well known in the skydiving world, not necessarily as as a criminal being involved in after all, conspiracy to assassinate the president is, how much more serious does it get?
Wow, so many things for me to deal with there. And I guess the first thing that I do want to talk about is just sharing a statement. And every Monday, I talk about the Zodiac Killer here on Black Box Online Radio. If you're curious, I invite you to check out Zodiac Monday, and on Thursdays about the Black Dahlia, much as Pat just said. And in the Zodiac case, I absolutely do not like any of the interconnected theories, like about how the Zodiac Killer was also the Black Dahlia Avenger, while the Zodiac Killer was also a member of the Manson family. I do not like any of them. And I was stunned when I found this JFK Skip Hall connection. D.B. Cooper could have been, involved with the Kennedy assassination. I was just like, oh my goodness, like full skepticism sense. But I looked at Skip Hall as a suspect, and I found that it doesn't seem purely baseless, like some of the theories that I just mentioned, and we just talked about the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection, which I think is mostly baseless. So I give credit to John Limbach. I mean, it seems like he has a lot of good ideas, a lot of good insights. It's definitely coming from a place of reason as opposed to just wild accusations and storytelling, and you just have to take his word for everything like these other crazy conspiracy theories. But I have a very important question for you, Pat Boland, because Ryan Burns brought this up on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel, and I have no idea really what to think of it. I'm not good at rating men's appearances, but he was actually just asking, is Skip Hall too conventionally attractive to have been DB Cooper? Because the flight attendants, who were young ladies, as you said, were very clear that Cooper was an unattractive man, right? So when you watch Skip Hall in videos, he's very clean cut. You might see him smoking his cigarette, trying to be like cool as a cucumber, and so on. Trying to emphasize on that. But what do you think about that?
Well, it is an interesting question, and I know we've talked about that a lot. I think the ladies were being polite. I mean, they were getting across that Cooper really was. I mean, I have to use the word homely. That he was not. I mean, Bill Mitchell's been real clear about that. The guy was kind of, geeky, or he just was not an attractive man. I mean, I agree with you that some of the pictures we've seen of Skip, he does appear sort of what I would almost say suave. He's got the little black mustache and his very black hair. I mean, he does look more Cuban, that in how we would stereotypically think of, with very dark hair, handsome looking. But I don't know. I don't discount that just because, again, what would young girls think is handsome versus not handsome? And the fact that, Flo had that sketch that clearly Cooper did not look like Grandpa Munster. I mean, I think they were making him, in their mind, he was a bad guy. So he certainly didn't look like someone really, he wasn't Steve McQueen or Brad Pitt or somebody. I think Skip could make himself, as I said earlier, I think he could make himself look different. I think he had that quality. So could he make himself look, put some greasy stuff in his hair? And if he had been sick prior to that, I mean, hepatitis is not fun. So, I mean, certainly he could have had some dramatic weight loss. I don't know that. But, when you're sick, you don't look your best. So I'm not discounting him necessarily as being too handsome, just because of the fact that he does have a lot of other things going for him. Now, the guy who made the movie that was like 22 in 1971, obviously we're throwing that out completely. But Skip has too many things going for him. But on the other hand, I don't like when people are trying to put, square pegs in round holes. So, certain things we cannot, if if our suspect is only 5'4", it doesn't matter if he checks every other box. So, there's a little wiggle room on certain things. So I'm okay with what Skip looks like. It doesn't bother me that he's so devastatingly handsome. No.
Okay, well, I do appreciate that, Pat. And, you brought up something that I think is very important, and that's that the flight attendants were much younger than Cooper, possibly, right? For all intents and purposes,
Yes.
they were younger than Cooper. And I did a recent Cooper Friday where I was talking about Najib Halabi as a DB Cooper suspect who might actually be one of the worst DB Cooper suspects ever. Nothing against him. He had a great career in aviation. But he might be someone where somebody who was 55 might not think that he was unattractive. But I was saying, well, maybe, a 22-year-old flight attendant would think that he was unattractive. So perspective is important, right?
Oh, it's hugely important. When I think back to when I was 22, these guys, Cooper was probably old enough to be every one of their dads, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So, I mean, you typically, as a young woman, I'm not saying there aren't women who are attracted to much older men. I mean, just think about Flo, what she did when he passed her the note. Obviously, this was not the first middle-aged man who had ever passed her a note by virtue of the fact that she didn't read it right away, right?
Yes.
I mean, she was thinking, oh, here we go again. So I think these ladies probably, had a lot of attention from these middle-aged, probably mostly married men. And, they were all just like melded into some, just middle-aged, not great-looking businessman type. I don't think Cooper was a businessman. I think he was pretending to be one. So, yes, perspective is everything. I still, at my age, have a hard time judging other people's ages. So, I'm flexible on the age. I know he wasn't 22. I don't think he was 65. But, I'm going anywhere between, say, 35 to 55. I think he could, which is really a ridiculously big span of ages. But based on what everybody's saying, I don't know.
But Pat, that's not going to be enough because the next suspect we said we were going to talk about is Milton Voral, who is one of the more widely discussed DB Cooper suspects in recent years. Even before Cooper Friday, people were coming to me and be like, hey, you got to see this guy, Milton Voral. Look at the comparison between him and these sketches. And, I wasn't in the vortex yet, but that's one of the things that pulled me in because my audience was just, asking me questions about what did I think about this DB Cooper suspect and that one. And Milton Voral gets on this list because you said that you wanted to completely just squash any DB Cooper suspect that was not a jumper, that had not worn a parachute. And as I understand, Milton Voral was not only 58 years old, so outside of your suspect range, 58 years old, he was a scientist and metallurgist, expert on metals, as well as very good with math and equations, a home inventor. But I haven't seen anything that he had paratrooping experience, parachuting experience, jumping, skydiving. None of that, unless I missed it.
Well, no, I mean, he did not have any military service at all. And no, to my knowledge, he had no really aviation experience in terms of, he wasn't in the military. In terms of, he was not a pilot. I've never heard that he, practiced skydiving or had any experience doing that. But I want to give a fair shake to all these guys because a lot of people have done really some amazing work. And I have to say, for people who don't know, how did we find Milton, or how did they find Milton? Tom Kay years ago had taken those. He was able to examine the famous tie that Cooper left on the plane, and he was able to take stubs with samples on it off of the tie. Well, those were run through a very reputable, well-known lab, and they came up with a list of particles, which was sort of mind-blowing. Like, what in the world is all this stuff that's on here? Well, apparently nobody really paid that much attention to it because nobody could figure out what it meant. The FBI certainly didn't pay any attention to it. But I do believe it was Eric Eulis who first was going through the list going, there's some really weird stuff on here, and maybe we can use this to figure out what kind of world at least Cooper was operating in. And then, so he was doing his own research. Another group of people were doing their own research. And this was brilliant. I have to say, I think this was the kind of detective work that's worthy of law enforcement, that they were able to take one of the odd particles, which was the titanium antimony, that had a particular ratio of titanium and antimony, which was not the norm. Again, I have no chemistry background whatsoever, but they were able to figure out that there was really only, I think, 2 places that were really dealing with an alloy of these 2 things put together in those ratios. For some reason, they eliminated one of those and end up with a company in Pennsylvania, right? Then they look at, well, who would be, because this combination was never commercially viable. So there were a bunch of patents filed with it, but it was never produced. So that's a really big clue. Okay, this is someone who's doing research with these particles, but it's never becoming, your laptop or whatever it is. So they were able to pinpoint. Now, of course, Eric pinpointed a different person. The other group pinpointed Milton, who apparently had 80 patents. This man was brilliant. He worked on the Manhattan Project. He worked at Hanford on the Fat Bomb. He was a brilliant scientist. So here we go. Here's a guy who he was one of the only people in the world who was apparently working with these 2 things together that, by the way, were on the tie that D.B. Cooper wore and left on the plane. Well, this is huge, right? So I can see why people were all in. Now, does he look like the sketch? I don't know. Kind of not. But
I think so.
I'm not, that doesn't bother me that he's not dead on. Ooh, he looks exactly like it. He looks enough like it to be passable. Yes, he didn't have any experience, but the guy's brilliant. Maybe he was he was making contact lenses for his kids. So maybe he was brilliant enough to figure out how to jump out of a plane, and he'd never done it before. The problem is, last year when they re-scanned all these stubs to do kind of a deeper dive, from what I understand, and everyone I've asked understands, that's not really what we thought it was. It's not really a titanium antimony alloy with those particular percentages, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's not that, well, then what connection does this man possibly have to the D.B. Cooper case?
Okay, though, so firstly, as you brought up, the reason why Milton Voral didn't do military service in World War II is because he was working on the bombs on one that was dropped on Japan. He's the one who actually solved an equation to correct an issue so that the bomb could be launched, period. And I completely agree that he was brilliant, but I heard 2 very big things from you there. One of them was that you were saying that D.B. Cooper absolutely wore a parachute in the past. He knew what he was doing. But then it seemed like you were giving some leeway to Milton Voral, whom we do not know had any parachuting in his background. So, is he just the exception that proves your rule, or what?
Well, I'm not giving him leeway in the sense that I don't think he's Cooper, and I'm trying to be fair in arguing what could be, even though I don't believe it, but I think a lot of other people do, because he mentioned that a lot of people are asking you about him. And that's how people get around that. Well, he was so smart that maybe he figured that out. I don't think that's what happened. Now that we know that there's probably not a tie connection, well, then there's nothing, right? The other thing that I was thinking about, there's certain things in this case that we just don't think about, like jumping at night. Like, who jumps at night?
The military.
I mean, I've asked someone who has I don't know how many jumps, has this Class D license, which is, like top of the line Skyjacker stuff, or high skydiver stuff. And he's like, he's only had 2 night jumps after doing this for like 50 years. So, we kind of forget about how outrageous that really was. So, I mean, going back, I don't mean to go back to Ted, but, the whole night jump. The other thing that to me we forget about is, why in the world did somebody pick the day before Thanksgiving to do this? I mean, that's why I don't like the Cooper is a family man scenario, because the only day of the year for just about everybody in the United States that dad is expected to be at home carving the turkey is Thanksgiving. So, I mean, why pick the one day? Because after all, Cooper jumped the night before, but he could never have had any sort of guarantee that he would be home the next day. There could have been roadblocks. He could have run into all sorts of situations that he never could have anticipated. So I don't like that. I don't think he was a family guy. The other thing I think is kind of funny is, what is the main reason that people say, well, he did pick the night before Thanksgiving? Well, that's because it was a 4-day weekend, right? So you had 4 days off from work. You could plan this. Except I thought the whole reason that Milton would have hijacked the plane was because he lost his job. Well, then you don't have to be at work on Monday because you don't have a job. So to me, that's a real, okay, why did you pick this day? This is a day that didn't mean anything to Cooper, which again really does go back to what you said about him possibly being Canadian, because they don't celebrate Thanksgiving when we do.
Yes, Canadian Thanksgiving comes earlier. Yes.
Or he just didn't have a family and there was nobody missing him at the table. But a guy with a wife and kids, he's home on Thanksgiving. I mean, that's like the one day. Even Christmas. I know the vast majority of people in the U.S. do celebrate Christmas, but some people don't. I mean, that to me, Thanksgiving, that's like the all-American holiday, right?
Absolutely, that is, though. And, I mean, I really want to stay on point with Milton Voral, but you did bring up something that is more or less addressed in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book, The Skyjacker, which I'm going through with a fine-tooth comb, and I use it in the Cooper profile segments here on Black Box Online Radio. And that is that if Cooper were married with kids, there is the possibility that he could have had some type of falling out. He could have been divorced, separated from them, and they weren't spending the holiday with him, or just dealing with some type of emotional stress. Because a lot of the people that are discussed in the book, The Skyjacker, which has case studies on other skyjackings, even though all the names are withheld, they're either given pseudonyms or only a first name, but somebody usually has some type of stressor that has driven them to commit the skyjacking. Very rarely it's someone who is just like, oh, well, I want to show off how tough I am, or maybe I want to show off my paratrooping skills. A lot of the skyjackers that are mentioned in that book don't even get to the jump. They're just kind of like failed attempts. But they have problems with their wives. Maybe the wife has left them. That stuff happens very frequently.
Oh, well, no, but that's exactly my point. I don't like the married with children scenario where you are still living with your wife and your children.
Sure.
I mean, that's what I mean. Yes. Could he have been divorced? Of course. All these guys, that's the interesting thing about all these suspects is how many times. I mean, we were looking at one guy. I ran out of, I couldn't even, I lost track of how many times he had been married and divorced. I think we were up to 5 or 6. So, yeah, I mean, these are a lot of people with a lot of failed marriages, children that they're alienated from for one reason or another. But that's not what we're talking about here, I don't think, with Milton. I mean, my understanding is he had a lovely wife and a lovely family that they all live together. So again, I think it's really hard to explain to your wife, like, where are you? Where were you? I mean, I just, growing up, I mean, if my dad wasn't there on Thanksgiving, like, we would have noticed.
The same.
To me, it's just a very strange day to pick. And I don't think we count that enough. I think there's just a lot of these things that we just kind of, oh yeah, well, it was the day before Thanksgiving, and I just said, well, wait a minute, who does this on the night before Thanksgiving? And Cooper had a reason, and I think maybe the reason was nobody cared where he was.
All right, though, I will answer your question and your challenge, and I'll turn to former UFC fighter Chael Sonnen, who claims to know the identity of D.B. Cooper, and he said that D.B. Cooper jumped into his own backyard, he was familiar with the territory, he hopped on a strategically placed motorcycle, and he drove home, and he had Thanksgiving dinner with his family the next day. And I know you're familiar with that story, because we've talked about it in the past.
Well, and look, anything is possible, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Does that make sense?
No.
Again, like I said earlier, a lot of things did not go as planned for Cooper, as we know, whether it was the knapsack, the money that, the refueling taking too long. I mean, there were a lot of things. So there's no way, I don't think, based on the way Cooper acted, that he would have said, to himself, well, I'm going to jump out of the plane and I'm going to immediately be able to walk to the bus station in Vancouver and get on the number 59 bus. I don't think he could have. This guy had a plan, and when you have a plan, like, what do they call it in the military? Is it PACE, like primary, alternate, contingency, emergency? I mean, you are thinking of everything that could possibly go wrong. This is how my mind works, okay? I'm a worst case scenario person, and I think Cooper had to think that if he had a wife and kids waiting for him, it had to occur to him that something might go wrong overnight, that he couldn't get back in time for Thanksgiving. And how was he going to explain where he was? How was he going to explain where he was the night before? He should have been setting up the kids' table in the living room, okay? I mean, that's what Cooper should have been done. If he was the typical 1971 family man, I don't think he was. Plus, Chael Sonnen has his own suspect who's not Cooper, as far as I know. So, yeah, I mean, anything is possible. Somebody said, I think he parachuted in and he had his own private jet. Like, he knew exactly where he was going to land. So the plane was just right there waiting for him so he could take off. Well, sure, that could have happened. Is that what happened? No, but it could have happened. So again, I want to give Milton a fair shake because the way they found him, I love that. I mean, that's like really good detective work. And you know what? Maybe the newest scan will tell us something different. Maybe there really are those alloys on there. And then we're back to, he's moved up the list again. But we don't know that. But right now, where I'm seeing him is really not checking a lot of boxes. But, that could change.
Now, I know you said in your previous segment here that you were going back to Braden, and I'll do that for a very brief second, because there's a book out there about Ted Braden called Paratrooper of Fortune, which is written by Drew Beeson. He's been a guest on this program in the past. I've interviewed Drew several times, actually, especially for the Zodiac Killer stuff. And in regards to that, I mean, I don't think he would mind if I share this, but last year we were talking about D.B. Cooper, and I asked him what he thought about Milton Voral, and he said, Milton Voral might be the worst D.B. Cooper suspect ever, because it's just hanging by this hairline connection that this particle that they found on the tie was titanium antimony. And what Drew told me, if I recall correctly, is the new scans that you were just saying say that might not be titanium antimony with the odd ratio, it might actually be calcium. Am I remembering that correctly? So if that goes, then Milton Voral drops in the suspect ratings. So
you know what, that was too, I mean, you need to get somebody who's an expert in all this stuff because it's not me. But as I recall, 2 years ago, they were saying that the antimony might be calcium because they appear similarly under the microscope or whatever. But then when we came back this past November, Tom, I believe, didn't know it was antimony. So that was kind of cleared up. But they weren't together, and that's the whole thing. If they're separate particles, then that's not what Milton was working on. That's my understanding. Like I said, I asked several people yesterday who were at the conference just to say, did you hear the same thing I did? And I believe Tom's talk is still on the mystery group. If you go under the featured tabs, I think it's still there. So you can probably listen to it yourself. But I mean, that is my understanding. Now, I think Tom kind of gave the caveat that, well, that doesn't mean that we're not going to find that there. But, that's kind of a needle in a haystack thing in the sense that why would you think you would find that anywhere? Other than the fact that there's like 100,000 particles that don't make any sense on that tie. I mean, it's very, that's just really a rabbit hole. I don't know if it's a red herring. I'm not really sure. I think Cooper left his tie on purpose, but I don't think he left it on purpose to throw people off track, because how would he have known that, they were going to be able to do all this work, 40 years later. So that I don't think he did it for that reason, but I just think he didn't care about that tie anymore. The FBI did say there was an interview with one of the agents, years later, who said they kind of discounted the tie because they felt like he could have bought it at a thrift shop, which I know people don't want to hear about, but that has to be considered.
Absolutely.
That was not Cooper's tie. I mean, to say, we're going by the science and all that. Yes, go by the science. But come on. I mean, people do buy clothes. That suit he had on, I mean, his whole getup to me looked like a costume. I mean, it was so out of style. A russet colored suit with black pinstripe, then shoes that look kind of new, but they weren't the type of shoes you would normally wear with a suit. And then that skinny black clip-on tie. The FBI even said his shirt was of an older style, which I don't know where that comes from, but something about the collars. If you watch a lot of old TV shows, of that era, I mean, you'll understand why Cooper really looked dorky compared to what men were wearing back then. So, why was he wearing all these really out of style clothes? To me, it looked like a cobbled together outfit. That's just my impression of it. Now, it could have been something he pulled out of the back of his closet because he thought, hey, I'm going to mess up my clothes tonight. And, why wear my new Brooks Brothers suit? But, I don't know. I think if I was going to hijack a plane, and I'm not, so who's ever listening, I wouldn't look like I normally look. I'd wear something that you wouldn't expect to see me in. And that would just be, to me, that, why do bank robbers wear, masks, or why do people wear disguises? It's because you want to give it different. He wanted to give the impression of being a businessman, which is why he did give that impression, which says to me that he wasn't a businessman. So that's where I am on that.
I really love everything that you've just said because, I mean, if anything, you put forward such a strong case for the thrift shop angle. Like, well, where would he get those clothes? I mean, go to a thrift shop, buy yourself a suit, buy yourself a black tie, and all of that stuff might not have been his, which would mean that the tie wasn't Cooper's, and he left it behind because it wasn't his. He didn't care about it. He didn't even expect that they were going to get any forensic material on it. He didn't know about the metallic particles. If that were not his tie, then that would just be absolutely detrimental to so many investigations. Eric Ulis always likes to say, if you can't explain the tie, then he's not the guy. And I've never liked that, and I'm sharing what I genuinely think. For everything that you just said, you made a strong case for the thrift shop angle. So this whole thing about the metallic particles, well, I mean, maybe Milton Voral donated it to a thrift store, and then Dan Cooper happened to buy it. And what I know that's horribly improbable, but that's exactly what I think you just made a case for. And I mean, it's a strong case, but I do not think that the tie is the pathway to DB Cooper, because we haven't even proven that DB Cooper wore that in some type of workplace setting where he would be exposed to the metallic elements, have
No,
we?
we haven't proven that. In fact, I was speaking with a lady last week, and I thought this was the most interesting story. She's actually a DNA expert, or she does, DNA testing. And there was a case, and I don't remember the man's name. I mean, you can look it up. He was convicted of a crime because the DNA was found under the murder victim's fingernails. His DNA was found under the murder victim's fingernails. Well, he was sent to prison. You know how it got there? Did you ever go to the doctor and they take your pulse and they put that little clip thing, kind of on your forefinger?
Oh my
I
gosh.
mean, can you believe this? I mean, he was a homeless man, and basically it got transferred in the ambulance.
Oh yes, yes, I've heard this one now.
She told me another story where, at the police station, they have blankets when victims come in, and a woman had been sexually assaulted, and they had wrapped her in a blanket. Well, guess what? A man's DNA was on her, but it turns out she picked it up from the blanket because this man had been arrested a couple of days before. I mean, these are like wild stories with DNA, the transfer, and a lot of this is because we have such advanced testing right now that we can pick up this stuff. But I'm just saying, I think the whole idea that, things are not always what they seem. And yes, he was wearing the tie. That doesn't mean it was his tie. And I know it was a cheap tie. But you know what? It's not only thrift shops. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother was always getting calls from the wounded veterans. This was a charitable organization. And they would say, put a bag of used, discarded clothing on your front porch. We'll come by on Wednesday and pick it up or whatever. And this was like growing up. My mother was, so can't you see some woman going in, her husband's closet and saying, oh, let's get rid of, this tie or the suit. They're so old. And next thing you know, who knows where it ends up? It ends up at a church. It ends up at a homeless shelter, the Salvation Army, who, lend clothing to men looking for jobs. They're still doing that. There's still organizations that you can donate your clothing to for someone who might not have a suit to go apply for a job. So, yes, there's a million scenarios. Now, was this probably DB Cooper's tie? I would definitely give it more than 50%. But is there a chance it could have belonged to someone else? If you disregard that, I don't think you're doing best practices on investigating. I think it has to be considered.
Because this is a debate, I would say that I would give it actually a very strong chance that it was not Cooper's suit, because not exactly. I mean, I agree that it's more than 50% that these were Cooper's clothes, but I mean, we can even say something like 60% if they were Cooper's clothes, and then we can look at the 40% of other possible outcomes. But I think there's a very high chance, and I'm even going to give credit to the Friday Beers channel, whom we were all talking about recently. I did a direct response to their video on DB Cooper, so did Ryan Burns. I invite you to check out his video as well. And they were like, no, wait a second. If Cooper were ex-military, and if Cooper were a businessman, shouldn't he have known how to tie his own tie? What's this guy doing wearing a clip-on? Ah, maybe everything that we were just going at, Pat, that maybe DB Cooper obtained it from a donation bin, maybe he obtained it from the thrift shop, maybe it was given to him, maybe it was something like, from being passed around, old clothes that nobody wanted anymore, and then, he's just putting this suit together because it wasn't actually something that he normally wore, which would firstly mean that the tie particles are not the pathway to Cooper. Secondarily, that would mean that the evidence that it left behind could be purely contaminated. Even if they found DNA off of, the tie clip or something, maybe that wasn't actually DB Cooper's DNA. I mean, what do you think about that statement, though? That if Cooper were a businessman and ex-military, he should have known how to tie a tie, and it's strange for him to wear a clip-on. What do you think?
Well, in fairness, and again, this is kind of a well-worn topic, but when I first got in the case, I don't have any brothers, but my experience with clip-on ties were little boys wore them. Okay. I mean, my dad never owned a clip-on tie. Okay. I mean, he wore, regular ties. So I thought that was so weird. But then I'm finding out, no, actually certain occupations, like if you work in a lab or a machine shop, a place where you would be strangled if your tie got caught. So yes, apparently in these labs, a lot of guys did wear clip-on ties. They're also super easy to take on and off. And I think, sometimes if you're working in sort of a, lab or industrial type of situation, you might not wear your tie while you're working, but you might need to stick one on real quick when you go meet the boss or, have a meeting or whatever. So, the more I talk to people about it, I think pilots wear clip-on ties. Police officers wear them. Again, somebody pulls on your tie, they're going to strangle you. Not if it's a clip-on tie. So there really are a lot of reasons why grown men would wear them. I was not aware of that because that was not my life experience. So I don't think there's, if Cooper was like a manager, in management, then I agree. I think wearing the clip-on tie no, he wouldn't be wearing a clip-on tie. But if he did work in the lab, which would be someone who would be exposed to all these particles, I'll give it that. I mean, it was a cheap thing, and it was an old tie. I think the other mistake we're making with the particles is that everyone is saying, well, what kind of an environment would he be in to have all these particles? Well, this tie was possibly 6 years old. Well, if Cooper was kind of a screw up, which I think is a real possibility, he might have had multiple jobs and been in multiple environments. Today, the clothes I'm wearing, well, I might leave the house and go to the grocery store. I might go to the gym, or I might do a million different things. Well, why not Cooper? Cooper could have worked XYZ plant, then he worked ABC plant, then he did something else, then he did something else. So, that I think we can't keep putting like everything has to come from one place, because last year, Tom Kay was talking about sand. There's a lot of sand on the ties. So maybe look at foundries. And I remember a couple years before we were all looking at industrial salt. But again, not all those things have to come from the same room. So, but then if they don't, then I don't even see in a million years how you could figure all that out. Where I think the tie is going to come into play when we have a really good suspect who checks a lot of boxes and someone goes, oh my goodness, guess where he worked? At a place where they were doing this, this, and this, and he wore clip-on ties. And it's going to be like a bow on the top of the package. That's where the tie is going to be really interesting. I personally don't think we're going to derive something from the tie directly to a completely unknown person and be able to pin this on them. I just don't see how that's possible unless there's something on there that's so bizarrely unique, like a moon rock or something. I mean, I don't know. Something from outer space, a meteor. What is going to be on the tie that no other person in the U.S. could possibly have? I don't see it. But that's just me. I don't know.
And I do appreciate that. But to move on with our discussion here, there is one final suspect that we said we would talk about, and his name is Wolfgang Gossett. I frequently refer to him as my dark horse candidate, meaning, all right, maybe I don't think he's the strongest D.B. Cooper suspect out there, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did turn out to be D.B. Cooper, a dark horse suspect, dark horse candidate. And with Wolfgang Gossett, though, he does check a lot of the boxes. Furthermore, he confessed to having been D.B. Cooper. He had a suspicious safety deposit box where he could have hid the money, or a lot of the money, also burying the money in other places. Now, Wolfgang Gossett was somebody who was stationed in the military in France, if I recall correctly. And you brought up, like, well, how many people were stationed abroad in places like France and Belgium. I mean, Wolfgang Gossett would check that box, so he might have been exposed to the Dan Cooper comics in France. I mean, if I remember, Dan Cooper was a Belgian comic, but it was in the French language, so that's why it was popular in
Correct.
Canada.
Correct.
And, I mean, he does check a lot of these boxes, but at the same time, my doubts are that Wolfgang Gossett was reportedly somebody who also told a bunch of frequent wild stories. And then it's like, well, if he's making up other stuff, maybe he lied about the Cooper confessions too. What do you think?
First of all, I mean, if he came into contact with these comic books during, was that World War II? I'm assuming. I mean, that's like 30 years before. I mean, so who's remembering that? So to me, I don't get that at all. I know he had the safe deposit box key. Well, why didn't anybody ever go look in there? I don't get that. I mean,
No idea.
This mystery box, didn't he give his son the key supposedly?
Supposedly, yes.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I would have gone, and that's like the first thing I would have done to go look. And again, who is confessed? How many people have confessed to this thing?
915.
I mean, that's so weird, though, that people want to be D.B. Cooper. Although I was watching this horrible show the other night about these murders of these young girls, and the cops said that how many guys confessed to that? So people are just strange. I mean, I think he was kind of an odd guy, the whole thing with the exorcisms. I'm Catholic. I still haven't figured out how he became a priest. I'm still on that one. I don't know. I think people are looking for attention. I don't know if they want to look cool in the eyes of their children, or they just have fantasies, kind of a la Walter Recca, that they, are nearing the end of their life and feel like they didn't accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. I don't know. I mean, that's a whole, psychological profile that I'm sure people have written multiple PhD theses on, of why do people confess to crimes that they didn't commit. But to me, there's no evidence that it's him. I mean, if there's a safe deposit box and it's got, a bunch of $20 bills and the serial numbers match, well, okay, case closed. But there's no indication of that. So I don't get him. I mean, I don't think he looks like the sketch. I mean, he was pretty somewhat bald, I guess, and I don't think he's really like a bad.
Hello, Pat. Are you still with me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh yes. The call just went out for a second. I lost one thing
okay.
you said. You said you were talking about how Wolfgang Gossett was possibly bald.
Doesn't it seem like he sort of had not a lot of hair, but that could have been just the picture. Now, that's the other thing with these. A lot of the photographs we're looking at were nowhere near 1971. In fact, even the photographs, I mean, I was naive. I thought when the FBI looked into suspects, they went and took their picture. I mean, what did I know, right? I mean, some of these, they're pulling up pictures that were like 10 years old. Some of them were pictures that had other people in them. I mean, so no wonder why the witnesses couldn't, identify someone. So I don't really know the famous picture of him, what year that was from. He does look fairly young in it. I don't know. I just don't see him as a realistic. To me, there's nothing other than he confessed, which again is Walter Recca. Again, well, he confessed, but other than that, he doesn't check any boxes.
But I do want to try and answer some of these questions. Why do people confess to crimes that they didn't commit? Everything you said is true, but also some people are just habitual liars and pathological liars and even sociopathic liars. And I've been exploring this stuff a lot lately where, I mean, the habitual liars, they tell lies frequently because they think it's fun. Pathologically would be if they have almost some compulsion to do it where there's no benefit and they just can't stop doing it. And sociopathic liars would be doing it for manipulative purposes. They're spinning the web of lies for manipulation. And with Walter Recca, I think the answer to that is yes. Everything. Everything.
He
like,
checks every one of those.
I do. I mean that is not a joke. Not a joke. I mean it.
Yeah, I mean, he had some weird compulsion to be important. or, I mean, nothing that he said added up with the case. So you'd think if you were going to make up a story like that, at least do a little bit of research to make it sound more believable. The whole thing with him being a KGB agent, but he's also with the CIA. I mean, are you supposed to tell people?
No.
I mean, I don't know. I thought it was kind of like a secret. Like you're telling people that are writing books about that, but you're not doing that. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know the man. I mean, I kind of put together the timeline of why what he said happened that night could not have happened. It was not humanly possible to walk that fast, that far with a broken leg. But, I mean, there are people, well, there's not many, I don't think, that, think it had to be him. But I don't know, there were just too many things that didn't really, well, pretty much nothing added up with him. But, his family, I guess, still believes it. So that's their right. And, they're looking into it, and, that's their privilege. But I don't think anybody really believes it anymore.
I really do have to ask you about that, and this is not even a debate question. This is something out of my own personal curiosity for the Cooper Friday segment, and that is, when you look at the Walter Reca story, multiple books have been written about him. At least 4 books have been written about Walter Reca as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And I've even played the video on my channel of when they were doing the presentation, and they just filled like the auditorium or the conference room, whatever it was, and all these people are listening to Walter Reca's confession on tape to have been D.B. Cooper. What is it about his story that has triggered so many people? Because you could just as easily say, my uncle confessed to have been D.B. Cooper. Yeah, no way. But like the fact that people keep exploring this. Oh, and it's not only my uncle. My best friend was also D.B. Cooper. And, well, we have D.B. Cooper's voice on tape, and then we're going to get to the truth, right? I mean, if I've really, just made synopses of all the D.B. Cooper books relevant to Walter Reca, why does that story ignite so much fire for people when it's most likely false?
Well, first of all, most people, like 99.9% of people in the U.S., really know very little about this case. All they know is the guy jumped out of a plane with $200,000 and he was never seen again. So the fact that the facts don't add up, people don't know that. This is also a small town, okay? So, the whole idea that, oh my gosh, this, he confessed and maybe there's a couple of other little things that might be of interest in his background or whatever. I mean, why not? Why would you think look at how many people have watched the videos of them finding the parachute in McCoy's attic. I mean, my husband was getting messages from people that we didn't even know that he knew we were into the case. I mean, I was getting more emails from random people. Oh my gosh, they've solved the case. It's because people don't know anything about it. They just know the very, very, slim amount of facts. So if somebody said this guy confessed, he's Cooper, he interacted with one of our own right here, the gentleman who was at the cafe, who I personally have spoken with. Yeah, sure, why not? Everybody show up. We're going to have free beer or whatever, and we're going to show a movie. And I mean, why wouldn't you believe? Why would you think people were making this up? You wouldn't. I mean, I just think human nature. People thought, oh yeah, I'll jump on the bandwagon, because they didn't know anything about it. I think some of the things involved in this were quite disingenuous, to be honest, because I think the story has morphed quite a bit over the years, and I do believe that person, the witness, I do believe he interacted with someone. I don't know if it was the night before Thanksgiving in 1971, though. And that, to me, is what the problem is. And I have really tried to get someone in that town. I've talked to the newspaper. They went through all the archives. I was trying to figure out, was there any notice in the paper that there was an event that night? Because he was on his way to, perform with a band at with the Grange Hall,
Yeah,
which
that's right.
was, like a farmer's meeting. I mean, I couldn't find anything. Nobody had any memory of this. There was nothing in the newspaper. I mean, I really looked quite a bit. I contacted a number of civic type organizations, and I even called the Grange Hall. Of course, their records had all been burned up in a fire. So, I mean, there's no proof either way what night that actually was. So I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to me. If there's a case right now that I don't know anything about, and somebody told me it was solved, and come show up, and we're gonna, I mean, I believe it, I guess. I mean, because I wouldn't have any reason not to.
Well, I think we both talked about that with Steve Hodel in the Black Dahlia case, where, all right, he's making this case that his father was the Black Dahlia Avenger, killed Elizabeth Short in 1947, and I had seen him on the TV when I was a teenager, and I was like, oh wow, I guess it has been solved. It's just it's never been confirmed, and even in 2019, 2020, when I was doing Black Box Online Radio, I didn't make a lot of Black Dahlia episodes because I had honestly thought, you know what, I think he has put forward the most convincing case that his father was the Black Dahlia Avenger. Then you find out
Yeah.
that as soon as you get under the surface and you start learning more about the case, whoa, 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 that's just what he claims. So many people dispute the findings for this reason and that reason, and there are reasons to doubt his findings and to doubt what he's putting out in his books. Exactly the same with what we've said about Walter Recca. There are reasons to doubt the story, reasons to doubt his claims, reasons to just think that he is making it all up. And when I was reading Lisa Story's book, Better Dead Than Poor, I can totally see how Walter Recca perhaps had an emotionally traumatic childhood, an emotionally distant childhood. He was involved with a lot of deviant actions and activities. I mean, absolutely, he seemed like someone who had problems. So this turning into some type of habitual lying is not out of the question, and it's not beyond belief. But I don't believe for a second that he was Cooper.
Well, no, I don't either. And it's interesting because since I've gotten into Cooper, and I do know a lot about the case, as you do, and a lot of other people do, and we watch all these specials on TV, and all we do, or these YouTube videos, right? And Ryan is always debunking them, and they need to be debunked because we know a lot. Right. So we can easily say, oh, well, what do you mean? That's not true. That's not true. So I'm now completely skeptical of any true crime show that I watch because I know that a lot of the Cooper stuff is not correct. So if I watch something about whether it be JonBenet Ramsey or, the Idaho murders or whatever I'm watching, I'm going, well, I don't know if this is true. The Cooper stuff is all fake. So this is probably fake too. But you wouldn't know that because most people have not delved into a cold case like we have because most people are normal, unlike us. And are not spending all their time looking at these cases. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think he's Cooper. If I had to be perfectly honest, I don't think we know who D.B. Cooper is. I don't think any of the usual suspects are Cooper. I don't think any of the dumb suspects are Cooper. I don't really, at this point, I don't think we're going to find out who Cooper is.
No, wait, Pat. I do have one question, though, and I wanted to save this one for the very end because, I mean, I really don't mean to just cut you off. It's just, I have to ask this because somebody wrote this out in my comments section when they said, all of the major Cooper suspects have been put out there. All of the widely discussed Cooper suspects whom we've gone through in this episode have been put out there. So, if any of these people were actually Cooper, wouldn't the FBI have just said so already? Wouldn't they have found something that would have incriminated them? And is it a waste of time to talk about them? What do you think?
Well, first of all, we know the FBI is not currently, investigating the case. So they're going to need something way more than a titanium antimony particle, with all due respect to the people who figured that out, who, like I said, I thought that was brilliant. You would think that some of these guys were probably well known. Well, we know, oh gosh, what's his name? That they did the DNA sample from his mouth
Sheridan
on one of
Peterson?
the Sheridan Peterson. So obviously they were looking at him. I just don't think we know. And it's funny because when I was at CooperCon and I was talking to Darren Schaefer, and I said, if we really don't think the case is ever going to be solved, what in the world are we doing? And he gave me like oh boy, like, right? I mean, if we don't think it's ever going to be solved, what's the purpose of all this? So, I mean, I still have a glimmer of hope, but I think as time goes on, it becomes less and less possible that someone's going to come out of the woodwork, although people are still coming out of the woodwork. I don't know. I hope it's solved just so we can go do something else. But I don't know. I just don't think we've hit the right person yet.
Oh, yes,
So,
I think absolutely everybody who's listening to this right now probably wants to know who D.B. Cooper was, but I do have one thing for you, Pat. And I heard this from Richard Jones, who runs the Jack the Ripper Tour YouTube channel and website and company, when I interviewed him 2 years ago, and he had followed the Jack the Ripper case for 42 years, now perhaps 44 years at the time of this recording, and he said, we're never going to know the truth about who Jack the Ripper was. But that didn't stop him at all. That didn't deter him. He's accepted the result, and he didn't necessarily think that that was a bad thing. And his explanation was that we are still studying history, right? And we are also studying about the ways people were thinking at the time, human behavior, and so on. And with Jack the Ripper, he talks a lot about how, if anything, that mystery highlighted some of the terrible conditions that people were living in England in 1888. With D.B. Cooper, I absolutely think this has highlighted the holes in aviation security. And as I said, I've been going through the psychological profiling of skyjackers from Dr. David G. Hubbard. There's an enormous amount of psychological research that went into, skyjacking for the time period, even if it's not specific to Cooper, but definitely about how easy it was for Cooper to pull this off, even though, as you said, it didn't go completely his way. But I would turn to a criminology student named Richard McCoy, who showed us about how there are just these giant holes that existed in the aviation system that had to be sealed. So I definitely think there is history, there's psychology, there are the social issues and problems of the time, and we have the ability to learn about that stuff. But make no mistake, D.B. Cooper is not as cold as Jack the Ripper. I want to know the truth. I want to know who Cooper was. I want to know how the money got to Tina Barr. And I want to know if that really was his tie or did he buy it at a thrift shop. Everything. Everything.
Oh no, I mean, I completely agree. And after all, we're talking about 150 years ago, or however many years, 130 or something, for Jack the Ripper. So yeah, maybe in 100 years, people will look back at D.B. Cooper and it will be like, looking at a dinosaur. Yeah, but it is. I was talking to someone really smart who, which I keep saying as well, that we can't understand this case unless we look at it in the context of the time period. And so, yeah, and I've learned, I mean, I was, a kid during that, but I've learned a lot of things. And I've learned about a lot of things I knew nothing about, like airplanes and parachutes and DNA and all sorts of things. So, from a purely intellectual standpoint, it's interesting to learn new things, meet new people. I've met some people in a million years I never would have met because we don't even live in the same country or whatever. So yeah, there's all those benefits, but we want to find out who he is. I mean, isn't that the bottom line?
Yeah, it is.
And I don't know. I'm anxious. I guess we're all just kind of like, hurry up and solve it. And then I don't know what we're going to do. But you have other cases you look at, so at least you have that to fall back on. I'm going to have to just start following one of your other cases, because then I won't have anything to do, right?
They are all extremely difficult to solve, because much as we've seen in the Cooper case, even when it turns out, they have Cooper's DNA, right? Maybe they do. I mean, we don't really know, and it's like that in all these cases. The Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, JonBenet Ramsey, where they have DNA evidence, but then, was it actually from the perpetrator, or was it a contaminant, or was there some other person involved? And they aren't arbitrary questions. That's not just mental gymnastics. Those are genuine problems that the investigators and forensic scientists are dealing with, and it's horrible. It's horribly frustrating because you want to be like, oh yeah, well, if there's DNA on the tie, well, that was DB Cooper's DNA, right? I would hope so, but think about all the possibilities and ways that that could go wrong.
Well, and it has gone wrong. I mean, we
Yes,
know that.
right.
Like, why aren't there more fingerprints? I mean, that's kind of strange. And where are those fingerprints? I would like to know that too. Like,
But
where's the
also,
hair slide? I mean, all that stuff has
right.
disappeared. So that's a problem now. But, you know, everybody needs to keep plugging along. And we talked about 4 suspects that, you know, again, I don't really know that much about gossip like you do. But as far as the other 3, I mean, I admire the work that the people have done on them. And I wouldn't count them out. Just because I don't think they're Cooper doesn't mean they're not. And that's just one person's opinion. So I say keep plugging along, and you never know when something, you know, you're going to have an aha moment on something. And you know what? It's fun. I hate to say it's fun because it's a crime. It's a serious crime, but it is kind of fun when
Absolutely.
you start digging into some of this stuff. So anyway,
But you know, like Ryan Burns said something on his channel about how if you were to look at the Jack the Ripper case and you're just dealing with these horrible stories of perhaps the worst murders that ever occurred, about women being stabbed in back alleys and the Ripper cutting out their organs and keeping them for unknown reasons and just leaving their bodies there. And then you get to DB Cooper and there's none of that stuff. And
no,
I mean,
and that's why I think I'm okay with it. I really don't want to spend my time, like you say, looking at pictures of dead teenagers or
it's horrible.
ladies who've been cut up or whatever. I did the Jack the Ripper tour in London. Have you ever done that?
I haven't been on one.
Yeah, well, I mean, in London, you can do a Jack the Ripper tour where they take you to, you know, all the locations where they found the bodies and stuff. It's actually quite interesting, like you say, about what conditions were like back at that time period. I mean, it was horrible. The squalor that people were living in, how these women were so desperate that they were, you know, it was either sell their bodies or they were going to, you know, not have a place to sleep or anything to eat. So, you know, it was a bad time. But it's an interesting tour historically as well as because of the murders. But I don't know. We need a DB Cooper tour. Who's going to do that? That'd be kind of interesting. We need to work on that.
Oh yes, but as far as like the new things that we do learn, though, you were talking about that. Even though I run a true crime channel, and I used to do this more or less as like a random topic channel where any true crime case was fair game, I had never done anything with aviation. I had never done anything with airplanes. And when I got to the psychology of skyjacking, it was shocking for me about how different it is. Like psychological profiling of skyjackers versus of serial killers and murderers and bank robbers. It's all just like starting over from point zero. So I've really found that it has been a beneficial experience for me to talk about Cooper. And Cooper is actually the only true crime mystery that I regularly follow where it's not some type of disgusting murder story. So in some ways, like, I find that it's definitely been a big educational experience for me. And I think you kind of said that it was for you too, right?
Oh, well, totally. I mean, I'm looking at all the books here. I'm looking at all the people that I've met I'm looking right now, the 727 pilot who gave me the pin that he used to wear on his hat. I'm looking at one of the Air America members who gave me something to hang up that talks about everything. So yeah, I mean, I've met some great people. I feel like I've had some real adventures with this. Last month I was spoke at the largest air show in the world in Oshkosh about DB Cooper.
Amazing.
And we had like a huge audience. I was completely about to faint. I mean, on many levels. But I'm not normally nervous, but all of a sudden there were all these people there and standing room only. People are really interested in this. So, I mean, when have I ever done anything like that, or even dreamed I would do anything like that? So, yes, this has been really an adventure. I consider it to be, at my age, this is like my third act or whatever, is that I've, become some sort of semi-known person in the Cooper vortex, but it's fun. It is fun. And yes, you're right. I've learned a lot of things I didn't know anything about before. I don't claim to be an expert on anything because I am not an expert on anything, but I do know a little bit about a lot of things, and it's fun, and hopefully I've contributed something to the case just by being here. I don't know. And I'm working on something that I think is might be quite interesting, but we'll see. That'll be for another episode. We can talk about that. But so I'm still digging. So.
All right, and Pat, thank you so much for appearing on Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio.
Thank you for having me. I always love listening to your podcasts. They're awesome. So I encourage everyone to listen to every single episode. And it was great to chat with you. And you take care, and we will talk soon.
And once again, I would like to thank Pat Boland for appearing on Black Box Online Radio's Cooper Friday. And that was the maiden voyage for the Black Box Online Radio hot seat, and we started with Cooper Friday, but I'm hoping to expand this segment into the other programs about the Zodiac Killer, as well as perhaps Jack the Ripper, and maybe even the Black Dahlia in the future. And to all of you who are following Cooper Friday, if there are any guests that you would like, specifically relevant to D.B. Cooper, you can put your ideas in the comments section down below. You can also get in touch with me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and of course on Facebook as well, using the Black Box Online Radio Facebook page. Now, to continue with today's episode, I would like to respond to a couple of things. Firstly, to one message from John Limbach, who was last week's guest. He is the author of the book Where Was Skip, and his D.B. Cooper suspect is named Skip Hall. And of course, there was a new live stream on Brian Burns's D.B. Cooper Sleuth channel, and I would like to continue with the Cooper Profile segment that is talking all about the psychological profiling of Skyjackers. Now, the first thing is, John Limbach and I were discussing something that is relevant to D.B. Cooper's smoking habit. And when D.B. Cooper was on the plane with Tina Mucklow, he smoked one cigarette and they shared one. Now, there were 7 other cigarettes that were smoked by D.B. Cooper. So really, I should say, in addition to the one he smoked with Tina, there'd be 6 others. Cooper smoked 7 cigarettes and Tina smoked one of them. That means 8 in total. And John Limbach sent me something that was a follow-up from our discussion last week, and that would indicate that that is actually rather in line with someone who would be smoking much more frequently than I had expected. And on Brian Burns's D.B. Cooper live stream, he said the exact same thing. Smoking 7 cigarettes in the amount of time that D.B. Cooper did is actually consistent with a 2-pack-a-day habit. In the past, I had stated that I thought D.B. Cooper was not a chain smoker. I was thinking someone who didn't smoke regularly, someone who would smoke the occasional cigarette, that would all fit into the profile. But if this is true, this information is true, then at this frequency, that would mean that ultimately I was wrong, and I will admit it. If D.B. Cooper were indeed a chain smoker, I think that would be much more relevant to how we would shape the profile, because I don't think somebody who did not smoke cigarettes at all would just start smoking at that level of frequency. So this could be something that's very important to pay attention to. Some other takeaways from Ryan Burns' most recent live stream is he pulled up some of the D.B. Cooper composite sketches. And as I was talking with Pat Boland, we have composites A, B, and C, which we like to call Bing Crosby, Cary Grant, and Grandpa Munster. But there's also a sketch that Ryan Burns was referring to as the initial sketch, one that the flight attendant Florence Schaffner did not like too much. And I think he said this as a joke, but he called it the wavy gravy sketch. Now, that may have been done in jest, but I think that we should make that permanent. The wavy gravy sketch. And I can't look at it without thinking about the book The Search for D.B. Cooper, which is going to explore some things associated with Walter Recca, also known as Shrek. But I think that that the wavy gravy is something that we really need to hold on to. And I have to give a shout out to somebody named Mari. Not sure who this person is, but they wrote into Ryan Burns' live stream, and they said one of the most brilliant things that I had never thought of. And that is that, very famously on the plane, D.B. Cooper offers money to the flight attendants. The most famous story is that he hands Tina Mucklow some money and says, he offers it to her as a tip, and she says that she cannot accept it because she cannot collect gratuities. And what this person, Mari, said was, why didn't Tina just take the money so that they could use it for fingerprint evidence in the future? And I was just thinking, oh my goodness, I love that. I absolutely love that. I love that type of thinking. But in all of the episodes of Cooper Friday that I have done, I never once thought about that she could have done that as a way to obtain more evidence about D.B. Cooper. And in all seriousness, not that many people should have been touching the money, because it's my understanding that this money was not just assembled immediately upon request of D.B. Cooper. He actually made the threat and the demand to have the $200,000, and they had money that was specifically put aside for this reason. So that would mean that there's probably a relatively low chance that they wouldn't be able to identify all of the people who had been touching the money. And there also are fresh fingerprints and older fingerprints. Yes, it's a really, really insightful statement. But ultimately, Tina wasn't thinking like that. I didn't think about that in all of the time that I've been looking at the D.B. Cooper case on all of these Cooper Fridays. But that is some very insightful stuff, and I do greatly appreciate that. And I have to give a shout out to Brandon Arnold, who sent me a segment from the live stream when he gave me a heads up about Ryan Burns was endorsing Eric Eulist on his legitimate campaign for the lieutenant governorship of Rhode Island. But apparently, by the time the announcement went out, Eric Eulist had already dropped out of the race. And I was totally going to endorse him too, but apparently he is no longer running for the lieutenant governor of Rhode Island. Well, Rhode Island will be in somewhat of an unfortunate state, so sad to say. But I would like to move on to the Cooper Profile segment here on Black Box Online Radio. And this talks about the psychological profiling of skyjacking, starting with the writings of Dr. David G. Hubbard. And in this book, he uses many different stories of skyjackers. And the one that I will talk to you about now is from a guy named Frank. This is a very short segment. And Frank is someone who is very different than the other skyjackers. And he is someone who developed a very, very clear motive. I mean, this really might be the shortest chapter in the book, because this guy, Frank, says he committed a skyjacking because of rage, because he had some type of uncontrollable rage, and he liked airplanes and flying because he viewed it as an escape from his rage. And that was the ultimate reason why he chose to commit a skyjacking. But by the time he's interviewed by Dr. David G. Hubbard, a psychiatrist, he is experiencing some worsening mental health issues. His attorney simply referred to him as a good old Southern N-word. Yes, he got called the N-word by his own lawyer. And, I mean, Frank was an African-American skyjacker, one of the few of them that's discussed in the book. But I guess it was just a different time for how people would approach the subject of defending their client, so to speak. But Frank is in this room with Dr. David G. Hubbard, and he's just exhibiting some very bizarre symptoms. He has his hands in a hyper-extended way. He refuses to sit down. He has to keep his back to the wall. And it's quite possible that Frank was indeed a schizophrenic. But, I mean, this is something that Dr. David G. Hubbard really zones in on when he's doing these types of interviews. And that is that it appears that many skyjackers actually have something that they are running for. Like, this comment made from Frank should not be easily dismissed, even though Frank is dealing with some mental health issues. This comment is actually rather important. This could mean that the skyjacker is committing this crime because he has some type of trouble in his life. We have to remember that D.B. Cooper said this very clearly on the plane, that he had a grudge. He did not have a grudge against the airline. He just had a grudge. And I don't think that that's a comment that was meaningless. I think he was actually mad at someone or something, or he had some type of problem with someone, or Something something triggered him to commit the skyjacking, and it might not have been purely about money. But Ryan Burns does point out that if he did need money, he would have needed more than $200,000 because, as I just said, he's offering gratuities to the flight attendant. He's handing Tina Mucklow approximately $2,000, so he didn't need the exact amount of $200,000. I mean, possibly. I'm sure you guys can think of some other scenarios. But I think this just goes to show something that has been very consistent in this Cooper profile segment, and that is that these skyjackers are usually very mad and very upset at some type of external entity. There's some type of issue in their life that has fallen out. Maybe they are having family troubles. Maybe they're having financial troubles. Maybe they're mad at the government. Maybe they're dealing with some type of unhealed childhood trauma, and they're using some other type of external issue as a target, as a way to distract themselves from the abuses that they experienced when they were younger. But ultimately, Frank is somebody who is very difficult to interview. He took an extremely long time to answer questions, even simple ones, yes, no, or I don't know. He struggled very deeply. I mean, Dr. David G. Hubbard really wanted to note that it was almost 1 hour over the expected amount of time that it would take to interview someone, because Frank was extremely slow in response to these questions. And I think that this goes to show that there can be people that actually do start out with more awareness of what they're doing, and their mental states can deteriorate. But this is not only about the mental state. This is not only about a condition like schizophrenia. These types of issues could exist in countless other individuals, particularly criminal deviants. Somebody once gave me this statement, and I think it's a really interesting one, and it is that not everyone starts out as pure evil. Some people actually start out as relatively good individuals, and then they fall off the rails a little bit. Then they slowly go downhill, and it starts to snowball, and it gets out of control. But when we look at some of these D.B. Cooper suspects, you will see criminal deviance in them, where maybe they were, law-abiding at a certain time in their life, and maybe some people actually did have some type of bad blood or a genetic predisposition to commit crimes. Because when I had Nicole Legg as a guest on this program, the co-host of the D.B. Cooper book review, she said that, well, they all must have been a little bit far out, because would you commit a skyjacking? Would I personally commit a skyjacking? No, absolutely not. But, that would be something where they're going off the rails, or perhaps up into the air, in the more literal sense. But then once they do that, is this something that's the result of just a one-off event where it's the first time that they've ever committed the crime, or were they career criminals their whole lives? I mean, if you have a suspect like Skip Hall, he was a criminal deviant. Ted Braden as well, a criminal deviant. And then how about Dwayne Weber, another criminal deviant? But then you would have people like Richard Floyd McCoy, whom I think that's more relevant to the kind of guy that falls off the rails, and then it starts snowballing, it starts compounding, and it gets worse and worse and worse, because McCoy committed his skyjacking, then he goes to jail, breaks out of jail, gets into the shootout, and everything that happened in between. He is somebody who fell off the rails, and he lost control of his behaviors, and he just entered into a world of criminal behavior. Now, I don't know everything about Richard Floyd McCoy, but that does seem to be like what's happening. So with D.B. Cooper, I could easily see it going either way. He could be somebody who had criminal tendencies his whole life, or he could have been somebody who just reached a breaking point. Now, I'm going to share something with you guys, and this is not exactly related to the Cooper profile. It's not even related to anything scientific. It's not related to the evidence. This is just something that I thought about. Now, I have no plans to write a D.B. Cooper novel, but if I were to write a novel about D.B. Cooper, one idea that I've thought of is, let's say D.B. Cooper survives the skyjacking. He gets away with it. He lands with his $200,000. Maybe he was able to hold on to it, and he's able to spend it. He's just using a 20 here and a 20 there. Really, in 1971, 72, and 73, they would have just been looking for people who were depositing large amounts of 20s. D.B. Cooper gets as far away as he can from Washington State, and over the next 9 years, he's just spending the money. he thinks that he's going to be living large. And after the skyjacking, his life just gets terrible. He thought that money was going to solve all of his problems, but it didn't. His life just gets terrible. He's trying to fix everything that he thought was broken in his life, and he can't do it. Why? Because he's still the same person. And, maybe he has the same attitude. Maybe his attitude gets even worse because he's D.B. Cooper now, and he committed a skyjacking. But the people in his life don't care. And then, in 1979, he goes back to Tina Bar, somewhere relatively close to where he landed. It's just some place in the Pacific Northwest that was somewhat familiar to him. And then he just thinks, you know what? This money brought me nothing but trouble. Here's the last $6,000 that I still have. I thought it was going to get my life back together. It's only made things worse. Then D.B. Cooper buries the money into the sand at Tina Bar, and then he does something to cause his own death. Being careful with my words for YouTube. Ultimately, drowning in the Columbia. Maybe he got dragged by a boat. Maybe he floated somewhere. But ultimately, he was perhaps pulled by a freighter out into the ocean. Once again, this is actually something that I've thought about. I wouldn't put that in the category of true crime because that is only surmise. So in regards to these types of criminal deviants, I would like to ask you guys what you think. Do you think that D.B. Cooper was a criminal prior to the skyjacking, or do you think that he was somebody who just reached a breaking point and he was like, you know what? I need money. This is one way to do it. I have an idea. I'm going to commit the skyjacking. What do you think it is? Criminal behavior or no criminal behavior in his past? And I don't mean something like, oh, well, he stole a candy bar when he was 11 years old. Not something like that. I mean, like, did he have a lifelong history of problems with the law? Or was he a relatively law-abiding citizen? Please let me know in the comments section down below. I think the evidence is really 50-50. And I also think that the evidence from the book The Skyjacker by Dr. David G. Hubbard is also 50-50. What is way more overbearing and way more pressing in The Skyjacker is people have grudges. People have problems. People have emotional reasons why they're committing the skyjackings. They're very upset with something in their lives, and that's what drives them to do these things. I want to know your responses. And in terms of novels, I might not be working on one about D.B. Cooper, but this weekend, anyone who's listening to this as it's coming out live, there will be the debut of the new story in the White Horse Killer saga. It will be called The White Horse and the Sun. It's a set of stories that I started in 2020, and now I'm on the final one, The White Horse and the Sun, and they are released in audiobook format here on YouTube. Please feel free to check it out if you want something to listen to over the weekend. And if you're listening to this in the future, I have a full playlist for the White Horse Killer saga here on YouTube. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That's all for me now. Everyone have a wonderful weekend, and until next time.